Christian counseling is comprehensive concerning the individual. I want to illustrate that this way. So let's bring my friend up here. He comes to you for counseling. Now, there are two things that you want to do primarily in big general categories. Well, one of those is obvious. You want to drill down to this person's heart to find out what his ruling heart motives are, because you know that change happens from the inside out. It's from the abundance of the heart that his mouth speaks, and so you need to understand both contexts of his life. You want to eventually get down to his heart, but you also want to understand what's going on above ground, what's going on in his world. Therefore, you'll listen to the narrative of his life. What is the story that God is writing in his life? And so as you interact with him, you know that he's a unique individual, and so you want to try to discern him. And so you ask him many questions, and you learn his narrative and his history and his life. You want to know who he is, and you have an objective, but you don't want to just jump down into the objective without being a good listener and taking time to understand the person. One of the places where you see this in the New Testament is in John 3 and John 4, where Jesus was talking to Nicodemus in John 3, he was talking to the lady at the well in John 4, and both of them had the same heart problem. They were unbelievers. But as he talked to them, their life, their history, their narratives, they were radically different. They were two different people, and you don't want to dismiss that because they are unique individuals, and we are not problem-centered in our discipleship. We are person-centered. The problems are the things that draw out what kind of person you have before you. But it's not about the problem, it's about the person, and therefore you want to understand the person. But sometimes when people hear something like this, they can think, well, there are 7 billion people in the world, therefore, I can only help a limited amount of people. Like, I can only help people that are like me. And it's so easy for someone to disqualify themselves because this person's life, history, and narrative is not like mine. Therefore, I don't understand them. And this is where I would appeal to the Christian discipler not to go there in their thinking, because, quite frankly, it's not true. Everybody is the same where it matters, at the level of the heart. Now, I have devoted an entire webinar to this idea that I'm about to present to you on the screen, and so I'm just going to move through it quickly here because it's an hour webinar, and I'm going to condense it down to just a couple of minutes. But I want to make sure that you do treat the person uniquely, but not so uniquely that you can't help them, because as you are listening to a person and gathering information on their life, their history, their narrative, at some point, you're going to cross a line, the dotted line that you see on the screen. And once you cross that dotted line, you're going to get into familiar territory, because that person is going to look a whole lot like you. I have an article on my website that's called 12 Universal Assumptions that you can make about everyone. And when you cross that line, you're going to start realizing that this person is not really that different from me. And that's why I said earlier that in John 3 and John 4, above ground, above the line, you have two radically different people, but they had the exact same problem. They struggle with the exact same thing that you struggle with and what I struggle with. And so there are at least 12. There's actually more assumptions you can make about all people, but I want to give you 12 of those assumptions that everybody that's listening to this webinar struggles with to varying degrees. We're self-reliant people. We want to do it our way. We struggle trusting God. And the reason that we're self-reliant is because we like to be in control of the situation. If I can control my universe, well, that would make me self-reliant. If you get underneath their control, you would find that what they're really going after is comfort. I want to find my comfort zone, and once I nail it, once I find it, I will control it by all means. That makes me self-reliant. Up under that comfort is this fear. Fear of what? Fear of being uncomfortable, fear of being out of control. You see, these idolatries stack up and form a worship structure, and they're in sequential order here, and this is the order is the same for all of us. And so a self-reliant person is a controller who's seeking to be comforted because there is fear running underneath his life. And if you get under the fear, there's this internal awkwardness called shame, and there is true guilt that God places upon all of us, and the tension is in his heart, and the tension is between faith and unfaith. And as you look at this worship structure, this is Adam. These are the exact things that Adam struggled with. Once he went from faith to unfaith, at Genesis 3:6, he was declared guilty by God. He felt a sense of shame. He told God he was afraid. He sought comfort through fig leaves and running and blaming. He took control of his universe and he became a self-reliant person. And every person born of Adam struggles with these issues, as I said, to varying degrees. These are some of the universal assumptions you can make about people, all people. Everybody struggles with these things. There are other things. Suffering is an obvious one. Fear of man, fear of others is another. We all struggle with some form of anger. We have sexuality issues, and we have a tendency to be self-righteous. These are just 12. The faith, unfaith is in one, is unbelief. But these are just 12 ideas that we all struggle with, and it's a part of our commonality. My point here is I don't want you to disqualify yourself as though you don't understand another human. Above ground, you might not, because they're so different from you. But once you start dealing in their hearts where it really matters, you'll see various things, not necessarily all of these things, but you'll see different things, and you'll be able to relate to all of them because they are your Adamic problems as well. Before we go to the second half of the webinar, let's take a break. And I want to make just an appeal to you that if you are able to help us in keeping our resources free, like this webinar that we're providing tonight, would you do that? And you can do that by becoming a supporting member. I would also ask you to think about if you are able to make the decision for me to come and to do this series at your church or any other training for that matter. I would be glad to consider it. Or would you appeal to your pastor and tell him what you're learning and say, hey, he would love to come to your church and do training. And if you would appeal to him to do that, that would be great. If you have a friend that you can share our ministry with, and if they're looking for a ministry to support, we would love to be that ministry for them to support, because we want to keeping our resources free. We want to get them out to as many people as possible. This is part of our Mastermind Training course. This is lesson number 5 in our 10-part Introduction to Biblical Counseling series. It is 10 webinars out of 24 that they watch, among other things that they have to do throughout the course training. But it is an all-online, self-paced discipleship and counseling study course. If you're interested in learning more about that, we do have a page on our website where you can read and listen all about it. Again, this is Introduction to Biblical Counseling, lesson number 5. I am Rick Thomas. Thank you so much for watching the webinar.